Imagine walking into a rented home. Maybe the heating costs are surprisingly low. Or perhaps it's the opposite, one where the drafts are just a constant battle, and, well, your bills are through the roof. Did you know that in England and Wales, there are actually specific energy efficiency standards? Rules dictating how warm and really how affordable a privately rented property has to be. Today, we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. The UK's Domestic Minimum Energy Efficiency Standard. You might know it as the MEES regulations. Now, our insights, they're pulled straight from the source. We're looking at government guidance documents, things like the official landlord guidance on gov.uk, and also the comprehensive regulatory documents behind it all.
Yeah, these docs are really packed with the details you need.
Absolutely. And our mission today, it's really to cut through the jargon, isn't it? Break down these, let's face it, quite complex rules. We want to help you understand what landlords actually have to do to make sure their properties meet at least an Energy Performance Certificate Band E, or, how they might qualify for a valid exemption.
Exactly. Getting to grips with the critical facts.
Hopefully you'll get those aha moments and leave feeling, well, a lot smarter about property energy efficiency and what it means for everyone involved.
Wow.
So let's start right at the beginning. This minimum energy efficiency standard, EES. What exactly is it fundamentally trying to achieve?
Well, at its heart, it's pretty straightforward. It's about making sure domestic, private, rented properties in England and Wales hit at least an Energy Performance Certificate, or EPC, rating of Band D. Basically, any properties that are rated F or G, they're considered substandard under these rules.
Right. So F and G are the ones landlords need to worry about.
Precisely. They're the ones that need improvement or, an exemption.
And this wasn't just a gentle suggestion, was it? There were some pretty firm deadlines involved that really forced the issue.
Oh, absolutely. There were key dates. The first big one was April 1st, 2018. From that day, landlords couldn't grant new tenancies or renew or extend existing ones if the property was below E, unless, of course, they had a valid exemption already sorted.
Okay, so that hit new agreements first.
Yes. Then the really big change came on April 1st, 2020. That's when it expanded significantly. The prohibition extended to all relevant properties, so landlords couldn't even continue to let F or G rated properties, even with tenants who'd been there for ages, unless they either improved them to E or registered an exemption.
Ah, so that covered existing tenancies too. That must have been a big scramble for some.
It was definitely a significant shift, made it much more comprehensive, no more just waiting for tenancies to end.
Right, so it forced action. But let's talk about the why. Beyond just, ticking a regulatory box, what are the benefits? Obvious for tenants, I guess, but what about landlords? Is there something often overlooked?
Well, that's a great question. The benefits are actually quite wide-ranging. For tenants, yes, the big one is lower energy bills. It's quite stark, actually. The sources suggest an average F-rated property costs about £2,124 a year to heat. An E-rated one, more like $4,425.
Wow, that's a potential saving of around £700 a year.
Exactly. A huge difference for many households. And that means, better thermal comfort, warmer homes, potentially better health outcomes, too. Especially important when you think about a third of fuel-poor households living in the private rented sector, often in these F and G homes.
That really brings it home, the impact on people's lives. Okay, so for landlords then, is it just an unavoidable cost or is there an upside?
There's definitely an upside, and maybe it is overlooked sometimes. Think about it. Increased tenant satisfaction often leads to reduced void periods. Happier tenants stay longer. One report we looked at actually showed 31% less void time for Band B properties compared to E or F, and maybe fewer rent arrears, too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Less hassle, potentially more stable income.
Precisely. The report mentioned 2 fewer weeks of rent arrears on average per year for more efficient homes, and the costs chasing those arrears dropped by 35%. Plus, you've got potentially lower long-term maintenance costs, and importantly, it could even increase the property's market value.
So it's not just about compliance, it's potentially a better investment overall. A win-win, maybe.
I think you could definitely frame it that way, yes.
Okay, so given all that, who exactly do these MEES rules apply to? Does every single rental property fall under this?
Good question. No, not automatically. A property is only covered by MEES if it meets 2 key conditions. First, it has to be let on specific types of domestic tenancy. Things like assured tenancies, which includes the very common assured short-hold tenancy, or regulated tenancies, or even domestic agricultural tenancies.
Okay, so the type of tenancy matters. What's the second condition?
The second is that the property must be legally required to have an energy performance certificate, an EPC.
Right, the EPC. We hear that term a lot. For anyone listening who isn't completely sure, what's the crucial thing to know about an EPC in this context?
So an EPC, it's basically a certificate showing the property's energy efficiency grade. A is best, G is worst. And crucially, it gives recommendations for improvements. You generally need one when you market a property for sale or rent, or when it's built, or sometimes if it's significantly modified.
And how long are they valid for?
They're valid for 10 years. And importantly, the EPC relates to the property, not the owner. So if you buy a property with a valid EPC, that EPC is still good.
Can you check if a property has one?
Yes, absolutely. You can search online on the official Domestic Energy Performance Certificate Register.
Okay, 10 years. Validity seems clear, but I bet there are some tricky situations. Could you maybe walk us through a scenario where that timing might matter?
Yeah, definitely. Imagine this. A property got an F-rated EPC way back in, say, 2009, and it was let on a really long tenancy, maybe 20 years. Now fast forward to April 1st, 2020, when the rules tightened for all tenancies. Even though that long tenancy is still running, the EPC from 2009 would have expired in 2019.
Ah, right. So no valid EPC anymore.
Exactly. So in that specific case, the property wouldn't immediately fall under the MEES requirements on April 1st, 2020, because there's no current valid EPC. It would only become subject to MEES later, perhaps when the tenancy finally ends, or if the landlord decides to remarket it, triggering the need for a new EPC. It really highlights that having a valid EPC is the trigger point.
That's a really important distinction. What about properties that are just completely excluded? Or maybe ones with special rules?
Yes, there are some key exclusions. Social housing is a big one. So properties defined as low-cost rental accommodation or owned by registered social landlords, they're generally out. Also, it only applies to properties let under a tenancy, not a license. So if you just have a lodger in your own home under a license agreement, that's not covered.
Okay, no lodgers. What about HMOs, houses in multiple occupation? They can be complicated.
They can be, yes. It's a common question. Generally, individual rooms within an HMO don't need their own separate EPCs. However, if the whole building itself has a legally required EPC, maybe because the whole building was sold or let as one unit within the last 10 years, then yes, that HMO is covered by MES.
Got it. So it depends on the EPC status of the whole building.
Okay.
And listed buildings, often a headache for renovations.
Yeah.
Are they exempt?
That's another common assumption. But no, they're not automatically exempt. A listed building is covered if it legally needs an EPC. The key thing is whether making the necessary energy improvements would unacceptably alter its character or appearance.
Which sounds subjective.
It can be. That's why landlords of listed buildings really need to talk to their local authority's conservation officer. Get specific advice. It's crucial.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room for many landlords. Cost. Improving a property, especially an older one, sounds potentially expensive. Is there a limit to what a landlord actually has to spend?
Yes, and this is absolutely key. There's a cost cap set at £3,500, and that includes VAT. Importantly, this cap applies to the landlord's contribution.
Landlord's contribution. Okay,
Yeah.
and what kind of improvements count towards this? Can they just do anything?
Well, they can install any measures they like. But if they want to rely on the cost cap for a potential exemption later, they need to focus on relevant energy efficiency improvements. These are usually the measures specifically recommended in the property's EPC report, or perhaps in a surveyor's report or a Green Deal advice report. Sticking to those is important for the paperwork trail, if needed.
Can you give us a feel for what these recommendations might look like? Maybe an example or two from the sources.
Sure. The guidance gives examples, like room and roof insulation. That might cost somewhere between £1,500 and £2,700. Big range, I know. But the potential saving for the tenant could be significant, maybe $837 a year, according to the example, and it could boost the rating up to, say, an E39.
Okay, so a bigger job, bigger impact. What about smaller things?
Yeah, absolutely. Something like basic draft proofing might only cost £80 to £120. The annual saving is smaller, maybe £18, but it could still nudge the EPC rating up, perhaps to D55 in the example given. It shows the variety.
Right, so a mix of potential measures. Now, funding these. The £3,500 cap is clear, but how does a landlord actually pay for it? Are there specific schemes or ways to do it?
Yes, there are essentially three main pathways the guidance outlines. First is using third-party funding. And interestingly, if you can get full funding this way, there's no £3,500 cap.
No cap at all. Where does this funding come from?
It can come from various places. The main one is often the energy company obligation, or ECO scheme. Big energy suppliers have obligations to fund efficiency improvements, especially for low-income households, and often targeting F&G rated properties. Things like solid wall insulation, maybe renewable heating.
Okay, eco. What else?
There's also Green Deal finance. This one's quite different. It's a loan, but the repayments are made through the property's electricity bill, usually by the tenant, actually.
Paid by the tenant. How does that work?
Well, there's something called the golden rule. It means the estimated first-year energy savings from the improvements must be equal to or greater than the first-year loan repayments. So in theory, the tenant pays the loan back via the bill, but their overall outgoings shouldn't increase because their energy usage has dropped.
That's clever. The savings pay for the loan.
Essentially, yes. And the charge is tied to the electricity meter, not the person. So if the tenant moves out, the charge stays with the property for the next occupant.
Interesting. Any other third-party options?
Landlords should always check with their local authority, too. Sometimes there are local grants or schemes available. It varies quite a bit.
Okay, so that's pathway one, third-party funding,
Right.
potentially uncapped. What if that doesn't cover everything needed to get to Band E or isn't available?
Right. That brings us to pathway 2, combination funding. If the third-party funding secured is less than £3,500 and it's not enough to get the property up to Band E, then the landlord has to top it up. They have to contribute their own funds, but the key is the combined amount, the third-party money plus the landlord's top-up, still must not exceed that £3,500 cap.
Got it. Capped combined contribution. And the third option.
The third pathway is self-funding. If no third-party funding is available at all, the landlord must use their own money to make improvements, but again, only up to that maximum of £3,500.
So they have to spend up to £3,500 of their own money if needed.
Yes, but here's some good news, or perhaps a clarification that's often missed. The average cost, according to government estimates, to bring an F or G-rated property up to E is actually around £1,200.
So much lower than the cap.
Exactly. You don't have to spend the full £3,500 if you can achieve Band E for less. If £1,000 worth of work gets you to E, that's all you're required to spend. The £3,500 is a ceiling, not a target.
That's a really crucial point. It makes it seem less daunting, perhaps. Can landlords count money they've already spent?
Yes, another important point. Any relevant energy efficiency improvements paid for since October 1st, 2017 can be counted towards that £3,500 cap, so previous investments aren't wasted in that calculation.
Okay, that's helpful context. So we know what needs doing, how it can be funded, the cap. But what if, even after spending up to the cap, or maybe because of some unique circumstance, the property still doesn't reach Band E? Is the landlord stuck?
No, there is leeway. This is where exemptions come in. There are specific, defined exemptions that allow a landlord to let a substandard property legally. But, and this is critical, they must be registered properly on the official PRS exemptions register. You can't just decide you're exempt. You have to formally register it.
The PRS exemptions register. Tell us more about that. How does it actually work? Is it complicated?
It's designed to be an online self-certification service. So the landlord creates an account, puts in the property details, uploads the valid EPC, chooses the specific exemption type they're claiming, and then crucially uploads the required evidence to support that claim.
Self-certification, but with evidence needed.
Exactly. And some of the information becomes public, not personal data, but things like the property address, the type of landlord, individual or company, the reason for the exemption, a copy of the EPC, and the dates the exemption is valid for. It's about transparency.
How long do these exemptions last?
Most of them last for 5 years. Some specific ones might be shorter. But here's a really important point for anyone buying or selling tenanted property. Exemptions do not transfer with the property.
Oh, wow. So if you buy a property with an exemption, you can't rely on it.
No. The new owner has to assess the situation themselves. If they intend to continue letting it and it's still below E, they either need to do the work or apply for and register their own exemption, assuming they qualify.
That's a huge point for buyers to be aware of. Okay, so what are the main reasons someone might be able to register an exemption? What are the categories?
There are several T ones. First, there's the all relevant improvements made exemption. This is if you have installed all the recommended relevant improvements up to that £3,500 cost cap. Or, alternatively, if there were simply no relevant improvements that could be made for under £3,500, and despite that, the property is still stuck below Band E. You need evidence, like installer invoices or a report showing no recommended measures under the cap.
Okay, so you've done everything feasible up to the cap. What else?
Second is the high-cost exemption. This applies if even the single cheapest recommended improvement would cost more than the £3,500 cap. So not the total cost, just the cost of the very next measure.
Have you proved that?
For that one, you generally need to provide 3 separate quotes from qualified installers showing that even the lowest cost relevant improvement exceeds £3,500.
Right. Makes sense. What about issues like wall insulation, especially in older buildings where it might cause problems?
Yes, that's covered by the wall insulation exemption. This is specifically for cases where you have written advice from a qualified expert, like an independent architect or a RICS surveyor, stating that installing the required wall insulation would actually negatively impact the building's structure or fabric, maybe cause damp, for example.
Okay, so expert evidence is key there. Any others?
Then there's the third-party consent exemption. This comes up if you need permission from someone else to do the work, maybe the tenant themselves, or a superior landlord if it's a leasehold, or the freeholder, or even the local planning department for certain changes, and you can demonstrate you've made reasonable efforts but couldn't get that consent.
Now, I remember hearing something change specifically about tenant consent and Green Deal finance. That was quite significant, wasn't it?
You're absolutely right. That was a key update. As of April 1st, 2019, a landlord cannot claim the tenant consent exemption just because a sitting tenant refuses to approve a Green Deal finance plan.
Ah, okay. So tenant refusal of Green Deal isn't grounds for exemption anymore.
Correct. In that specific situation, the landlord is expected to find alternative funding, including using their own money up to the £3,500 cap if necessary. However, the exemption can still apply for other reasons. A tenant might refuse consent to works, or if consent is refused by other third parties like freeholders or planners.
That clarifies it. Are there any other main exemption types?
Yes, 2 more key ones. Fifth is the property devaluation exemption. This requires a report from an independent RICS surveyor confirming that installing the required energy efficiency measures would actually reduce the market value of the property by more than 5%.
So proof it would actively harm the property's value.
Exactly. And finally, there's a temporary exemption for recently becoming a landlord. This gives a 6-month breathing space in certain situations. For example, if you buy a property that already has a tenant in place and it's substandard, or if you suddenly become a landlord unexpectedly, maybe through inheriting a property with a sitting tenant, or due to tenant insolvency under specific legal frameworks.
Okay, a short grace period for specific circumstances. That seems fair. Right, so we've covered the requirements, the funding, the cap, and the exemptions. But what happens if a landlord just doesn't comply or tries to bend the rules? What are the actual teeth behind these regulations?
Well, the teeth are quite sharp. Enforcement is handled at the local level by local authorities, and they have significant powers to investigate suspected breaches. Their first step might be to issue a compliance notice. This basically asks the landlord for information, things like the EPC, tenancy agreements. Absolutely. Failure to comply with a compliance notice can itself lead to a financial penalty, even before they determine if the property itself is non-compliant.
Okay, so let's talk penalties. What kind of fines are we looking at if a landlord is caught letting a substandard property without an exemption?
The financial penalties can be quite hefty, and they're applied per property, per breach. If you've been renting out a non-compliant property for less than 3 months, the penalty can be up to £2,000. Plus, and this is important, a potential publication penalty on top of the fine.
And if it's been longer than 3 months?
Then it gets more serious. For renting out a non-compliant property for 3 months or more, the fine can be up to £4,000. Again, plus that potential publication penalty.
What about providing false information, say, on the exemption register?
That's taken very seriously, too. Providing false or misleading information on the PRS exemptions register can lead to a penalty of up to £1,000 plus publication.
And failure to comply with the compliance notice you mentioned earlier.
That carries a penalty of up to £2,000 plus publication. There is an overall maximum, though. The absolute maximum financial penalty per property for a specific breach is capped at £5,000.
£5,000 max fine per property, but this publication penalty keeps coming up. What exactly does that involve? It sounds like more than just a fine.
It is. It means the local authority can publish details of the breach on a public section of the PRS exemptions register. This would include the landlord's name, if it's a company, not usually an individual, the property address, details of the breach, and the amount of the financial penalty imposed.
So it's public naming and shaming. essentially.
You could certainly see it that way. It remains public for at least 12 months. It's not just the financial cost, it's potential reputational damage, which could impact a landlord's ability to attract tenants or even secure finance in the future.
That's a powerful deterrent. What if a landlord feels a penalty is unfair? Can they challenge it?
Yes, there's a clear process. First, the landlord has the right to ask a local authority itself to review the penalty notice. They can present their case for why they think it's wrong. If the local authority reviews it and upholds the penalty, the landlord isn't out of options. They can then appeal the decision to an independent body, the first-tier tribunal.
So there is an appeal route.
Absolutely. It involves specific timelines and evidence, but the process is there. And really, understanding this enforcement side isn't just crucial for landlords. It underlines how serious the government is about these standards, which ultimately feeds back into better quality housing for tenants and affects the market as a whole.
Okay, so pulling all this together, what does it really mean for you listening to this? We've covered a huge amount today, haven't we? From that core need for an EPC Band E.
Yeah, right through to the funding options, that £3,500 cap.
The exemptions, the register, and those pretty significant penalties for getting it wrong.
And if you connect it all to the bigger picture, look, these regulations, they're a really crucial step, not just landlord versus tenant. It's about managing energy costs across the UK, improving living conditions for potentially millions of people, and let's not forget, meeting those wider environmental targets. It all feeds in.
It's really clear, isn't it? Energy efficiency in private rentals, it's not just a nice to have anymore. It's a legal must do with real teeth and real impact. And this isn't the end of the story either. The government's already signaled its intention to look at raising the bar further, aiming for maybe EPC Band C for as many private rented homes as possible by 2030. So this is an area that's only going to become more important.
Definitely an evolving landscape.
So here's the final thought to leave you with. What does all this mean for you? If you're a tenant, how can knowing about these rules empower you? Could it help you find or even ask for a more energy-efficient home, one that's cheaper to run? If you're a landlord or thinking about becoming one, how does this knowledge shift your perspective? Does it change how you look at property investment or plan maintenance, maybe thinking more proactively about upgrades?
Maybe for everyone, how do these seemingly quite specific rules about buildings fit into that bigger push we're all part of towards a more sustainable future, one warmer, less drafty home at a time?
Lots to think about. And of course, for specific advice relating to your own property or situation, we always recommend seeking independent legal advice.